Hey guys, I just wanted to let you know that this week's episode is another epic. We talked about so much that I couldn't fit it all into one normal size episode, and this is already over an hour and a half of a beast of an episode. So, if you really like this, be sure to check out my Patreon, where you'll find the almost 2 hour extended version of this episode. For only $3 a month, you can support this show directly, and you'll get exclusive blogs, movie reviews, extended episodes, and behind the scenes updates from yours truly. So sign up if you haven't already, and for patrons, the extended episode will be uploaded today. That's right, because it's actually ready this time. Now, it's time to explore the darkness and the horrors of the 1980s.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
Have you ever felt a knife cut through human flesh and scrape the bone beneath?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Be my victim.
You are all my children now.
Hello, my name is Austin Torres, and welcome to the Would You Die podcast, the show where we talk about our favorite horror monsters and villains. Today, I am joined by two dear friends of mine who know all too well of the struggles of trying to make it as a millennial filmmaker slash podcaster in modern America. Please welcome my friends, David B. Jacobs and Devin Shepard, best known as the Cadaver Dogs.
Yo.
Hello. The struggle is real.
Yes. Yes, it is. And I am so happy when I get to talk to other filmmakers slash podcasters trying to make it as a millennial in modern America.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a fun time out there. It's economy aside, we'll
Oy vey.
We really should start a club and get t-shirts.
of how miserable we are as filmmakers.
Is the club called
And
millennial slash
podcasters.
filmmakers slash podcasters? Millennial filmmakers slash podcasters.
Yes.
That's the name of the club.
There's got to be more than us, at least 10 other people in the United States, at least.
Yeah, I think they're on our current text chain of podcasters, and just so we can complain about the current market.
Yeah.
But
I
also
love it.
so that we can cheer people up and feel better about the horror community, I guess, is also a thing.
Speaking of positivity, today's topic is probably the scariest, most horrifying, most vile, the most nasty, just downright evil topic we've ever discussed on the Would You Die podcast. Ronald Reagan.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hard to get much worse than that. Don't
to
worry, we're
say-
going to try to stay as apolitical and both sides as we possibly can. We want to be very even and balanced and not too political. I'm joking.
Yeah, David, what world?
This is horror
are-
movies. They've always been political.
Yeah, we are millennial filmmakers slash podcasters in modern America.
It's always going to be political.
Exactly. Before we dive into this extremely juicy topic, which I'm so excited for, because I'm not the first person to describe Ronald Reagan as juicy. How did you guys, and whoever wants to go first, I don't know who wants to go first after I just said that, but whoever wants to go first, how did you guys get started in horror?
David has a different story than me, but I'm one of those people that has grown up in a horror family. My dad was always a horror movie guy. So I just kind of the second I could start watching movies, my dad was like, here's The Exorcist, here's The Omen. We're going to watch these movies. So it's kind of just been my love, my comfort. And then when it came around to figuring out what my future life is going to be, I was like, I want to make horror movies. They're the things that make me happy. I want to talk about horror movies. So I became a filmmaker and now a podcaster and working in the horror movie genre, which has been amazing.
I love that.
Unlike Devin, 2 months ago, my dad looked at me and went, so why horror? Yeah, they still don't understand. And because of that, I did not realize that I liked horror when I was growing up. I definitely did. but I wasn't ready to accept that. I just thought monsters were the coolest thing ever. Every time there was a horror episode of the cartoons, like all the Hey Arnold Halloween episodes and whatnot were amazing. Scooby-Doo was my jam. So like I loved all these things, but I didn't like horror because that's different for some reason. And then in high school, a friend of mine was like, "So David, you keep like telling me about this massive universe that you're creating and writing called Monster Wars, where you're just putting all the monsters together and making them fight each other. And then you wrote this other story where you were trying to do a superhero thing, but it just wound up being monsters again instead. I think you might like horror, David."
That's the gateway horror, man. Like, it's that stuff that you don't realize is horror, and then you're watching So Weird on the couch at like 7 p.m. on the Disney Channel, and you're like, it's Disney, it's not horror, it's fine.
And I love that because not everyone who listens to this show will know this, but I've been on your guys' show before, and we talked about, is it horror? That was the topic of that episode.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
like films like Jurassic Park and King Kong and a lot of those like monster movies where people are like, well, Jurassic Park isn't very scary. Well, it kind of set me on this path, so maybe it is.
Right?
I
Gateway
might
horror.
say that's just like your opinion, man.
So
It's incorrect, but that's fine. It's a terrifying movie. I don't know about you.
I'm drawing a
Look.
line in the sand. Sorry, wrong president.
All I'm saying is if you saw like a velociraptor in the streets, you're not going to be like, oh, I could take that. You're going to be running. And, you can't outrun a velociraptor, but that's besides the point.
I mean, to be fair, if I saw like one like small child in the street like waving a knife and going like, ah, then I'd be like, I can't take that, and I would run.
I mean, that would basically be Chucky, and Chucky has a pretty high body count, so you would be right.
Yeah.
Unusually
Yeah, I can't
high.
take Chucky. Well, it's because he's had like 8 movies and a TV series, so he's racked them up over the years, and he is basically immortal.
Yeah, and he was a serial killer before he became the doll.
That's true. I don't know if we know what his count was before.
Yeah, I'm
he
curious.
turned into a doll. Huh.
Don Mancini, if you're listening, we need the answer, please and thank you. Also, come on my show too. You seem like a cool dude. Now I'm thinking about Chucky. But yeah, to your guys' point, Devin, you were mentioning earlier how like The Omen was like a big film for you growing up, and me too, because I'm Catholic. So, we got to get fucked up with The Omen and The Exorcist, or else we're not real Catholics. That's not a true statement. But now I'm thinking about, like, you said you'd be afraid of a child with a small knife. David, I'd be afraid of a child. I've seen The Omen.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. I'm not Catholic. I'm Jewish, so therefore I'm more of a Rosemary's Baby guy. They're not Jewish, but they might as well be.
Can you please go into that?
No.
The religious horror always terrified me. Possession horror is still like the one subgenre that like really freaks me out. And this whole like rise lately with the rebirth of The Omen, I don't know why I chose that word, but it was very fitting. And then Immaculate. I think it's really hitting home and scaring me quite a bit. But I love it. I love that it's back.
Yes.
So which do you prefer, Immaculate or The First Omen?
Immaculate, I think.
Austin?
I preferred The First Omen.
I will argue the theater experience between those two were very different because David and I saw it in Immaculate in a theater full of like, I think it was like first night. Super exciting.
Yeah, Sydney Sweeney was there.
Behind me. Sydney Sweeney was there. We all got Sydney Sweeney masks.
Yeah.
It was really hyped. It was really
cool.
fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't see First Omen in theaters. First Omen I just saw like last week on Hulu. I think I prefer Immaculate. Immaculate's more fun is what it comes down to. First Omen though is really well shot and well acted, and it feels a little better thought out. Like it kind of addressed a lot of my complaints about Immaculate, which is that in Immaculate, the fact that she's a nun is just kind of tacked on, and that's
Yeah.
true to the behind the scenes stuff as well. It wasn't originally set in a church. She wasn't originally a nun, but that was like 10 years ago. So when Sydney Sweeney revived the project, now she was too old to be a boarding school student, even though she plays a teenager in Euphoria. Therefore, they just said, okay, we're just gonna have you be a nun instead. Now we're gonna reset it there. And I'm like, that's a lot more interesting though. I want to see her having this like crisis of faith.
She also said,
yeah.
I love that she said this too, because she very much knows like who Sydney Sweeney is out there for the public. She's like, I want to see the Sydney Sweeney in like the most opposite setting that people would imagine Sydney Sweeney being. And I was like, bless you. Thank you for owning your sexuality and love you. Thank you.
And to follow up a huge romantic comedy hit like Anyone But You with Immaculate.
Well,
I think
actually,
that's
she
genius.
followed up Madame Web with Immaculate.
What's that? I never heard of it.
It came out between them. Yeah, it's just this like little obscure, not very well known movie. It was a masterpiece. I think it should probably win like all the Oscars, but it's not going to because no one heard about it.
That movie was incredible. I finished it and I was like, I want to watch it again.
I still haven't seen it.
Oh, dude. It is a treat. It is so bad, but like so good.
I feel that I think it's on Netflix, but honestly, me and Netflix are beefing right now.
Oh shit. Oh, what's up with Netflix?
They're too expensive. I can't afford that shit no more.
It
That's fair.
is too much. It's too much.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be Shutter price. I mean, what better quality movies are we getting anywhere but Shutter anyway?
Exactly. You know, I just think there's too many of those streaming services. I'm just gonna say it. I think they done messed up.
Oh yeah, I mean this is also tied into why the industry is in decline right now and there's no work anywhere and blah blah blah. We don't need to get into that yet.
We
I
could
don't know,
blame it all
guys.
on Reagan.
It might tie into some of our themes that we are going to be touching on.
True.
Yeah.
I do want to say real quick, I really, really like Immaculate. I think Immaculate was so much fun.
It's really
But
fun.
if I had to choose between the two, the Omen fanboy in me won't let me pick the other.
I'm just happy there was some fan service for the first like 5 minutes of the new Omen film and how fan servicey it was. I appreciate, but like done in like an artsy way, which I really appreciated. I was like, yes. But it's my favorite kill that the impalement from the original Omen is like the thing that always stuck with me.
The my big critique with the first Omen, not the one with Gregory Peck, but the one with the jackal penis, is there were no Rottweilers.
Yeah.
And if that's my biggest complaint about your movie, I think it's a pretty damn good movie.
I mean, what movie would not be improved with some Rottweilers?
Thank you.
I guess the answer is the original Omen because it already has Rottweilers.
Well, that's what I was saying, because like I want more fan service.
Cat people.
Now I'm trying to think of like movies that would 100% be improved with Rottweilers, and I can't think of any that wouldn't.
That would not be improved with Rottweilers?
Right. Like imagine Kramer versus Kramer if it had a few more Rottweilers.
I just feel like the movies would be so much quicker because it'd be like, oh, and they are saved the day. They've saved the day again, these dogs. Don't worry.
They have resolved the divorce issues between Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep and determined who gets the kid.
Exactly. Chucky's taken away.
One of them gets the
you
kid,
know.
the other gets the Rottweilers. There we go.
Happy endings. See?
Exactly.
Done.
Everyone has a happy ending. Literally every movie could use a Rottweiler. Except for Candyman, ironically. There are two people who hate Rottweilers, or no, who hate dogs. It's Candyman and Michael Myers. It's canon. And if the new Star Wars show is anything to go off of, fans love their canon. See it
This
all
is
the time
true.
on Twitter, how much
But I
they
feel
love
like-
their canon.
Do horror fans love canon? I feel like horror fans are more here for the chaos.
I mean,
I think you're
Halloween is a
right.
weird one for that because Halloween has like 5 different canons.
But
And
like that's
every-
like a lot of
every
horror
movie-
franchises, like
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm pretty sure. How many movies are there?
Isn't-
10? I'm pretty sure
I-
there's 10
yeah.
canons.
Yeah, I think every single Texas Chainsaw movie reboots the canon.
Yeah.
Hellraiser does not have continuity at all after the second one. It claims to, but it doesn't.
The
This is
first
where I
Omen
think-
changed it up completely, and it's
Yeah.
a better movie because of it.
This is where I think the Scream movies are going to go by the wayside. It's because they're sticking too hard with the canon. I think they need to add the time travel like we were promised.
I've said it
Well,
before,
that
and I'll
was
say
totally
it again.
killer.
I liked that movie.
So did I.
And kind of relevant in a way to our topic of discussion. Maybe not so it being like true 80s horror, but like being a 2020s horror that reflects on the 80s. It kind of can look back on Reagan era politics through the lens of a Gen Z, Kiernan Shipka, who, gets Back to the Future.
And in Back to the Future, he goes back to the 50s, and when Doc wants to test to see if Murray is really from the future, what does he ask?
Who's president?
Ronald Reagan. And then
The
Doc
actor?
goes, the actor? Oh, man.
I love it. I knew Back to the Future was going to come up organically. I
Yeah,
just
of
knew
course.
it.
Of course.
It had to. I'm very happy Totally Killer came up too.
Yeah, that's a good one to pull. It also made me think of another one to comment on when we get into it too.
I mean, also Candyman's a bit of a legacy Reagan as well.
I would agree with that very much so.
Yeah.
Yep. It's got the housing discrimination and segregation and just the extremely horrible gap between the rich and the poor and all the drug problems and war on drugs and how the war on drugs actually just made everything a lot worse. And, the fact that Reagan was involved in getting drugs and putting it on the streets as well.
And bees.
And bees.
And bees.
Reagan
Also bees.
famously hated bees.
Yeah.
It's canon.
Because Jimmy Carter was from a farm and Ronald Reagan said, I'm going to be president now. He doesn't like anything associated with farms.
That's canon.
Yep.
Like bees.
The one I pulled was Us, which is also Reagan influence, because modern Reagan influence, because it does do 80s
Hands Across America.
Hands Across America, but then also ties it into like modern day. And we get into this a lot. We did it a whole episode on Us, so I won't go like too deep into it, but we do talk a lot about like the parallels between the 80s administration and Reagan's administration and today's administration, or what was then the administration, which I think was Trump. That was like right after Trump got elected.
Yeah, that was Trump.
That Us came out in 2019. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that would be like in the heyday of Trump.
Yep. Same with
Yeah.
Ready or Not. We did an episode on Ready or Not and society. So we did some comparing between Reagan and our modern Trump.
Yeah, Society is a big one that is, I feel like, directly influenced by Reagan. Should we get into it? I feel
think
like
it's time.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
we're already in
tiptoeing.
it.
So
I
first,
think
just
we're
some
already in it.
background with like me and Devin and Cadaver Dogs and Reagan. That Ready or Not Society was like our first episode, and Reagan was just being talked about. And then like a few episodes later, we did Fright Night and the Lost Boys. So of course Reagan came up again, and like he just kind of kept coming up very naturally in conversations until it sort of became a running joke, but also still is just very regularly actually relevant. Like in the one we did recently on The Blob, we didn't even bring him up. Our guests started talking about Ronald Reagan. He's just like, well, obviously Reagan's relevant.
It's and this is why we wanted to pitch Reagan for the monster for the show, because he did heavily influence horror movies at the time.
Yes. Horror movies, I think, are like reflections of what society is going through.
Yes.
Both individually as their own pieces of work are looking at trends. And with a president who is as, I'm going to use the word consequential as Ronald Reagan, like we are still feeling the effects of his presidency. And I don't foresee a future where we're not feeling the effects.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one being that like the platform that Ronald Reagan like came to office through is essentially the platform that Trump is using, to the point where Trump actually is using Reagan's slogan of "Make America Great Again."
Yep.
Yeah, that originated with Ronald Reagan.
When I said I loved the 80s, I didn't say I wanted to live in the 80s.
Well, we'll see what happens with Trump again, so it's possible.
Yeah, we got
Yeah.
what? The greatest hits of the 20s? No, not even the 20s, the 30s, really. No, the 20s with the pandemic, the 30s with the
Yeah.
Great Depression.
The tens was the pandemic.
Oh, you're right. You're right. We didn't get the economic boom of the 20s. We didn't get no roaring 20s.
We're
We
not
got the
getting
depression
anything
though.
good. Yeah. Depression in more ways than one.
Yeah.
I love being a millennial.
Millennial filmmaker podcaster. It's great.
There was also an epidemic under Reagan, that being AIDS. So
Yeah.
that was also relevant to that one. And his treatment of it was very similar to how Trump treated COVID, where his idea was to ignore it. And when people first like you can find this recording of a reporter bringing up AIDS in like 1982 at a conference with the Reagan administration. So it's not Reagan himself, but it's a spokesperson, and just literally laughs at the guy
This is what
and
they
just starts
did
making
Jeez.
jokes.
in so many press
Mm-hmm.
conferences. They just laughed about it and made jokes about fairies,
Mhm.
as in
Mm.
like fairy tales. They're like, oh, this is just a fairy tale, and then started laughing about fairy. Is that a slur? Should I not use that? But yeah, it was like the presidential administration making fun of gay people and laughing about it. And I'm like, what world did people live in at this time? A really bad one. A really bad one.
Yeah.
One that we're still in, because like in those terms, not much has changed.
Yeah. And I bringing it back to horror movies. I mean, like the AIDS epidemic obviously is spoken a lot in horror. I mean, thousands and thousands of people were dying. So people are faced with grief, the terror of having sex, the terror of like being, because there was miseducation everywhere, the terror of like being in another room with a human being, the terror of like
Yep.
being like our society was so fearful that it's no wonder that we then took and artists and filmmakers then took to the horror genre as a way to like discuss all of the feelings that we were going through around the AIDS epidemic. And David, I know you have a list of films specifically that touch on this.
I do. Yeah. And it is specifically horror.
Yeah.
Of the other 80s movies I've seen, they don't, I mean, even the horror movies don't tend to explicitly say this is AIDS. They don't tend to explicitly discuss AIDS. That didn't happen until the 90s with Philadelphia with Tom Hanks. But, and it's weird because in movies in the 80s didn't even usually like reference that gay people exist explicitly. If that was not a thing before, in the 70s you had movies like Rocky Horror Picture Show, Dog Day Afternoon, Cabaret, and now all of a sudden in the 80s it's all goes hush hush. You can't be gay anymore.
Yeah, there's insane homophobia.
Yeah.
So horror movies are a great vehicle for this because they are slightly removed from reality in a way where they can reference these things subtly or through metaphor, sometimes even unintentionally. Like The Fly is a movie where a lot of people saw that and said, oh, this is what it's like to be in love with someone with AIDS, where his body is now just decaying and falling apart. He's covered in spots everywhere, and it's slowly killing him. And David Cronenberg outright responded to this and said that was not my intention in making the movie, but I absolutely see where you're coming from, and I think it's a legitimate interpretation of the film.
Yeah, because it's art is influenced by life and our experience in it.
Mhm.
And there are some films that are a little more, I think, deliberate. Obviously, one that we always talk about and covered on our show was The Lost Boys.
Yes.
Specifically, actually, and Fright Night.
Yep.
Vampires became really big in the 80s, and gee, I wonder why. It's a blood disease. Vampirism is a blood. It was just like that's too perfect that these two things correlate with each other. So we really saw like an influx of films using vampirism to talk about the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah. The Lost Boys, to be specific for those who haven't seen a movie in a while, it has this teenager who starts riding around with this group of like motorcycle dudes, and then they feed him some weird food. They tempt him to literally jump off a bridge, And Slow Light feels like very seductive, like he's being seduced by these other men. And then he wakes up the next day and he's a vampire.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Fright Night also is like kind of similar in those illusions where we have Dandridge, the main vampire character, who is seducing men, young boys in the back alley to become a vampire. And then later on, spoilers for Fright Night, we see one of the young boys that he did quote seduce to become a vampire die a horrible death
Yeah.
of just like rotting away, which is the way that a lot of people described AIDS.
Yeah.
I've never made those connections with like the Lost Boys and Fright. I've seen the Fly being alluded to as like a movie dealing with AIDS before, but I never thought of the Lost Boys or Fright Night in that respect. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't seen the Fright Night. I haven't seen Fright Night, so that's probably
Oh, you
why
should.
I never
Oh,
thought
One of my
about it.
favorites.
And
you won't
I
necessarily
saw
catch on to it right away, but it's neat. There's a lot of queerness in the movie. I mean, the literal plot is he suspects his neighbor is a vampire and he needs to prove it. He needs to kill this neighbor who lives with another man. It's very weird when you break it down. And then he teams up with his favorite actor from the 50s.
It was like a Vincent Price duplicate.
Yep. Got to make America great again and go back to the 50s.
That's yep.
Tell me why when you said his favorite actor from the 50s, my brain was like Ronald Reagan? He's not going to help.
But also to be clear, like that actor is also very queer coded, and the main kid is also very queer coded. Like every character in this movie is queer coded. And it kind of feels a bit like he's what he's learning is to take these feelings and sort of shove them away and not give into temptation because of what happens to his friend. Like his friend gives into temptation and turns into a vampire and then dies this horrible death. And it's a funny movie.
It's been on my list for a while. There's so many classic horror films I haven't seen. There's a lot I have seen, but I just
fair.
feel like when you're a horror fan, I feel like when you finally check one off the list, there are 10 more about that you didn't even know existed. But yes, they're classics. People love them.
It's
Yep.
hard. My list runs deep. I just
it's
keep
great.
watching 80s movies. Like it's really a problem. I'm like, I really need to watch some more of like Hammer horror and like the old classics. But I just really want to rewatch an 80s slasher grunge movie.
Well,
There's
it is a
also-
great decade for horror.
It is.
Yeah.
Because of Reagan. Is my argument.
Kinda, yeah.
For several reasons. I mean, we touched on one being like his ignoring AIDS and that becoming like a really, really bad epidemic because his administration didn't do anything about it until much, much later, if at all. I mean, something else that constantly comes up is this rise in religious, conservative religious values at this time. Because Reagan really, I didn't know this actually, but Reagan was the first president that was like backed by evangelists, like Christian fundamentals.
Oh, really?
Fundamentalists. Yeah, like that's where it started. That's why we're so fucked today, is because like Jimmy Carter ended up like pissing off a bunch of evangelists who voted for him because Jimmy Carter was like pro-abortion and pro-equal rights and like started voting for all this stuff. And they're like, what are you talking about? All those people are ruining the world. No. Reagan, we gotta get you in there. We gotta get you into the White House so that you can start destroying abortion and gay rights and women's rights and
Yes.
letting us get away with taxes. A bunch of shit that he did.
The moral majority.
Ironically, Jimmy Carter was doing a bunch of stuff Jesus would like, and that pissed off the conservative Christians.
Well, yeah, that's usually how it goes. Jesus
This is
was a
where we're at.
socialist.
Yeah, it was a sorry,
Yep.
that was a delayed laugh. It was a big swing though. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you said moral majority, and that was definitely a push in the 80s. I mean, something else that we're seeing a lot in the films that you mentioned, actually, all of those families, like in Lost Boys, in Fright Night, they have not traditional family structures. I know a big push in the 80s was this nuclear family, like let's go back to a man and a woman who are raising their kids. this was something that like Christians thought at the time, or not Christians, but like, Christian fundamentalists thought at the time that gay rights and women's rights were threatening the traditional gender values and the traditional family. Which, like, why? Yeah, sorry.
You guys seen?
No,
I
you're
watched
good.
this movie last night because I felt like it would be relevant. Have you guys seen The Stepfather?
Yes.
No, I haven't seen it, and it seems really awesome, and I want to see it. It's on my list with Fright
It's
Night.
really fucking good. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. It's so good.
What year was that?
85?
Wow.
Well,
Man.
that's Terry O'Quinn, right?
Yes, and he is amazing in
He's
this
the
movie.
reason I want to see the movie.
I don't think I've seen him
Terrifying.
in anything else, or if I have, then I don't remember him in anything
He
else.
was in Lost.
Oh, what? Who was he in
Oh.
Lost?
I don't know their names. I remember the polar bear. He was the bald guy.
Locke? In the wheelchair?
Yes.
Really?
Bald
I'm
guy in
pretty
a-
sure.
Oh, wow.
I am like 98% sure. I am Googling
Wow,
it
he looks
right now.
so different, which I guess also kind of the thing in The Stepfather, because he keeps putting on different disguises throughout the movie, so he won't be recognized.
Yeah,
But
John Locke.
basically, what this movie is about is he's a serial killer who marries into families because he really just wants a nice American family. And then when they inevitably disappoint him, he kills them and moves on to the next one.
Which is
Okay.
just like, whose nightmare is that? Like, is it the conservatives' nightmare of like, oh my God, we're never gonna get a true American family, or is it the woman's nightmare of like, oh my God, my husband is going to murder my entire life?
Well,
It
the
could be
daughter
both.
is the main character. The daughter is the one who is like our perspective.
Right. Or the kids of, oh my God, a new stepdad is gonna come in and ruin everything.
Yeah.
But like yeah.
And it's pretty on the nose a lot of the time too. I mean, there's a part where he has a different job every time he changes his identity, but this time he is in real estate, and there's a barbecue in the backyard where he does a toast, and he says like, "What I really think is that I'm selling the American dream."
Oh, there you go. The
Just says it.
American dream.
Flat out. There's
So
a part where the daughter kisses the guy that she likes in front of their house, and he just immediately flings the door open and starts screaming at the kid. He's like, "She's 16!" And the kid is like, "So am I."
Too young
And
to
then he
have
goes
sex.
to wife, and she's like, "That kid was basically undressing her." It's like they literally they kissed.
So I am so glad you're talking about like the American family, as specifically like the American dream right now, because there are a bunch of films I would love to dive into with this. Films I've seen.
Yes, there you go.
To go from The Stepfather to like these, I'm thinking of Poltergeist being like the American family, the American dream, A Nightmare on Elm Street,
Mm-hmm.
Yup.
and Christine.
Ooh.
I'm so happy you mentioned Christine. Yeah. Yes. And I'm happy you mentioned Poltergeist, but please continue. And I'm excited to talk about Poltergeist because it's my favorite film.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, that's a great favorite film. I'm going to start with Christine
Great.
because I think, well, when you're saying like the American dream and like the American family, I think the 80s had this huge nostalgia boner for the 50s.
Yes.
Kind of like how the 2010s had this huge nostalgia boner for the 80s. I think we're in our 90s era right now.
It's always 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's exactly the most like we love the 50s film being Back to the Future, but
Yeah.
they weren't afraid to like be like, hey, the 50s were kind of racist, weren't they? Like Back to the Future, it portrays the 50s in this dreamy light, but then like it's like, oh, everyone was assholes back then too. At the same time, that's not Christine. In Christine, there's this huge nostalgia for the 50s, I think.
That's a
Yeah.
big Reagan thing. I mean, specifically talking about, the nuclear family and make America great again. It's going back to that time before the civil rights movement, before,
Mhm.
the abortion, Roe versus Wade was passed, before birth control became widely used. Like this time that everyone, romanticizes as like a great time for the white American family.
Yeah, and as the movie goes on, he also like starts to exemplify more and more like the kind of man that he's expected to be, that is more traditional, more based in the 1950s values of like, oh, you have to control your woman and all those things. He becomes more of a punk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's corrupted by Christine, but Christine is like the embodiment of the 50s. She is a 50s Plymouth Fury. She's always playing 50s rock and roll, and he is kind of corrupted because he starts off as like your 80s like nerd who like
Yep.
he can't open his own locker. He gets picked on by everybody, but as he gets corrupted by Christine, he's embracing the more toxic elements of the past. I think it could also be read as just toxic masculinity in general.
Yeah, it's very conflicting because you're like, obviously this is killing him and he's not a good person, but at the same time, you're like, but he's like standing up for himself now, and he's like finding things that he loves about himself, and he's not like getting beat up and like picked on as much. But ultimately, yeah, it goes too far.
So nostalgia can be good to an extent. There's a point where it goes too far and tends to mischaracterize the past and glorify the past and overlooks a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like Last Night in Soho gets into that, and Totally Killer gets into that.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Bringing that gem back. I think Christine can help lead us into A Nightmare on Elm Street,
Yep.
which while we were emailing setting this up, you mentioned A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Yes.
So I'd love to know why that one specifically.
So if we want to start there, because that one I think stands out and is like a little different than the others, although it still plays on some of the similar themes that we'll get into with the rest of the franchise. Nightmare on Elm Street 2, there is specifically a fuck ton of queer coding.
Okay.
If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend the documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which a friend of mine co-directed. But that
awesome.
one, that's like basically a documentary about that movie and specifically the lead actor, Mark Patton, who himself was a gay man. And he read the script for this movie and said, oh, the character is gay. He immediately read the script and picked up on all of this subtext, which the writer did put in there on purpose. So some examples of it. I mean, the idea of that movie is that Freddy is going to possess him and take over his body. So first off, you have another man who is entering his body. But second, you also have that there is some malicious force inside of him that wants him to do things that he doesn't want to do. He just wants to be like a normal straight man. And look, here's a pretty girl who he could have a normal straight relationship with, but he's more interested in becoming Freddy Krueger and like killing mostly men in that movie. There's a part where the gym teacher is murdered by like being stripped down naked and then like whipped to death. There's a part where his male friend is like, oh, there's a beautiful girl there who wants you, and all you want to do is sleep here with me. Once you realize that this movie is queer coded, you will never unsee it. It is all over the place and not very subtle. And when this came out, the movie did not do well. I mean, it made a fuck ton of money because it was a sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street, but it was critically derided, and specifically critics caught on to the queer subtext, which apparently went over the filmmakers' heads because the writer put it in there. The director had to rush the movie and was like, I was just paying attention to the effects. I did not realize that it was gay somehow.
Which is a little hard because like Bob Shea is like in a gay bar wearing leather.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize it either, he's claimed. And I'm like, dude, you own the studio. What do you mean? Like, you're wearing leather. Like,
I mean, we can choose to believe them or to not believe them. It is entirely possible that they were just shifting responsibility. And unfortunately, that responsibility wound up falling on Mark Patton. And he was basically accused of making the movie gay, which he didn't. It was in the script. But the screenwriter also just passed the responsibility on to Mark Patton.
Right.
And this wound up, he was in the closet before this movie came out. But because of the reception of this movie, he was essentially forced out of the closet
Mm-hmm.
and it ruined his career.
Oh, that's
He's
horrible.
not able to get more work in this era because there was not a lot of research about AIDS yet, since Reagan didn't want to do any research about eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, women didn't want to kiss him, so he couldn't be in any scenes where he was kissing a woman because they wouldn't do it. And he didn't have AIDS at that point. He wound up getting AIDS later in the 90s. He survived. Still alive, but he has been sick recently. And yeah, these are the things that documentary gets into. And it's a really good documentary. And it spreads a lot of light, sheds a lot of light on what the mood was in that era toward AIDS and toward gay men just in general, and why everyone had to be so hush-hush about it.
I love Nightmare 2, Freddy's Revenge,
Hmm.
because I have not seen the documentary, but I'm definitely going to, because that sounds so good and so interesting.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts is that set piece when Freddy finally takes over the body and he's in the real world. Spoiler alert, if you guys haven't seen the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie, he it like happens at a pool party.
Yeah.
Not that pool parties are gay, but there's like a lot of
I was waiting for that. Yeah.
But like there's a lot of topless dudes, you know? It's a lot of kids who are exploring other kids, so to speak. And like when he's there, he's like, "You're all my children now." And just I just think it's a interesting film.
Daddy
And
Freddy.
Daddy Freddy, yes, we love Daddy Freddy. And I just love the scene where him and his like best guy friend, or not Freddy, the main character and his best guy friend, like they get into a fight on the baseball field or something like that.
Yeah.
And the gym teacher forces them to do push-ups, and the main character's like, "Dude, why do you have a problem with me?" And his friend's like, "No, I don't. Just passing the time."
It's
But
very coded. It's very coded.
yes. But I would like to transition us to the original Nightmare on Elm Street film, because I'd like to start talking about what the American dream is again, and how A Nightmare on Elm Street really deconstructs what it is to live in that perfect American suburb. And I know other films like Halloween did it first, but there's something about Nightmare on Elm Street, which, you know, Wes Craven is a genius and he knows his works inside out. And I could do a whole podcast on Wes Craven, and I have, but like there's this, I'm going to sound like a very smart film critic right now. There's this dreamy quality to the way A Nightmare on Elm Street is shot. A lot of it feels like you're watching a dream, and this applies to both like the actual dream scenes and the scenes set in reality. Nancy Thompson, she lives in that perfect American family, but her mother's a drunk. Yeah, you're right. Seemingly, her mother's a drunk. Her dad's never at home.
Yeah, it's like, I love that you were describing it as dreamy, because it's just like this seemingly perfect thing, but her parents are obviously like having troubles. They're divorced, right? Which is like something that we like realize too. So they are a broken family. But it's funny because like we covered Nightmare on Elm Street for our episode on the American Dream. So perfect, ding 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 there. Yeah. And David didn't realize that they were divorced. I'm like, yeah, because this movie
like 10 times.
Yeah, it does such a good job of like showing you everything is okay on the surface, but underneath there's really fucked up shit going on. I'm sorry, I'm cursing if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, you don't fucking swear on my show. You're good.
Thank God, because it's gonna happen a lot.
AIDS.
Yeah, you're right. We're talking about darker shit. But there's something disturbing underneath this shield of the American dream. And it is, yes, it's far deeper. It is a nightmare.
Yes. And it's not just on Elm Street, it's across America.
Yes.
Oh, I'm gonna put that on all my little like clips when I edit this.
Oh, so good.
I feel so smart now. And like the fact that Freddy Krueger, he was killed by the parents because he got off on a technicality.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was
and it was
arrested. And yeah,
mob justice. Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels a little bit like the satanic panic that you have. I mean, Freddy wasn't literally worshiping the devil, although maybe he was. He's a dream demon now.
I think he was doing worse shit.
But
Yeah.
yep,
Well, at the time, well, Satanic Panic, and you can get back on topic, David. But yeah, Satanic Panic is based in children and the and like bad things that happen to kids. Yeah,
and a
without
lot of
getting
it
into details.
was overblown. I mean, obviously in the movie, Freddy actually did these things, but in the real world, it was something that was completely overblown, and most of the things that were being accused did not actually happen. And the fact that
Mhm.
Nightmare revolves around this case where someone has been accused of molesting and murdering children and then gets lynched for it really is like that's fascinating. And then it's his revenge for all those things that happened.
Yeah.
Except he's actually guilty.
But that's what the scariest thing was of the 80s was like all this terrible stuff is happening right underneath your nose and you don't even see it. I mean, I think that's like what the platform was for Christian fundamentalism at that time. It's like these things are destroying this quote unquote American dream, this perfect life that you have, and you just like can't even tell how much they're destroying us. It's not true. It's making things better, but that's what they were saying.
The Nightmare movies do also have a strong religious element to them,
Yeah.
which it's a little more subtle in the first one. We touched on it on our episode on Cadaver Dogs. But like as the series goes on, eventually they introduce Freddy's mother, Amanda Kruger, who was a nun who was raped.
Mhm.
So they present Freddy that way as a sort of perversion of Christian values.
And to bring it back to Freddy Krueger getting lynched by the parents, mob, the mob rules. That was a Black Sabbath reference to my 80s loving heavy metal homies out there. But like, because you're right. It's totally dealing with like the satanic panic and parents taking things into their own hands and the 80s. And I think it's also dealing with like the very real fear of like, the government didn't do shit.
Yes.
The ones who are supposed to be punishing, because Freddy actually did it. That's the other thing. Like, Freddy's a monster before he's, a dream demon. And this community felt like it needed to take matters in its own hands because the paperwork and the authorities didn't do their job. And I think there's a lot of that, like, I don't want to say a lot of distrust in the government because there were a lot of people in the 80s who were like, what do you mean? No, like they're doing great. That's more of a 70s film.
Yeah, but
it's distrust in it's also distrust in parents though, because it's like the authority figures in this movie are the parents, and they are the ones who are like putting all the rules. They're barring your windows, right? You can't see that boy anymore. No, don't do any of these things. Like the parents are the ones who are enforcing that moral majority, the family values. They're the ones who lynched Freddy. Like, even though Freddy's the one doing all the killing, the parents are like the real thematic villains of the movie. So it is directly rebelling against them and these conservative beliefs in that sense. The father's literally a cop.
Right. Yeah. Well, and every time that you have like teenagers or a younger generation and an older generation of film, I always like look at teenagers as kind of a representation of the future or like the upcoming era, right? And so we're seeing a lot more teen movies in the 80s because I mean, people who are making these movies are more on the liberal side, and so they are poking directly, and excuse the pun, at the conservatives to wake up and realize what is happening. And they're really trying, like these filmmakers are trying to show you what is actually happening in the world. And I think they are giving this power to teenagers in these movies because they do see them as the ones that are paying attention and like are going to make change and are going to fight directly against this administration. And just to bring it back to Reagan, for making things bad and terrible and back like it was in the 50s.
And not for listening to the kids.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of different elements of like the Reagan administration and its impact on horror. And we talked a bit about the American dream, but I do want to kind of see how that dream affects the family. And I really just want to give Devin a platform to talk about Poltergeist.
Please.
Yeah, it's funny. So I say this quote a lot because I love it, but Steven Spielberg created E.T. as the American dream and created Poltergeist as the American nightmare.
Ooh.
But both are kind of directly commenting on the American dream. Poltergeist specifically, what a lot of people end up talking about, because I think we did touch a lot on the nuclear family and the calls
Mhm.
coming from inside the house and how the Reagan administration connects to that. But something else that people talk about when researching Poltergeist is the economy and that is presented in the film. The American dream at the time was to buy and own a home, and we were seeing a lot of films around that time of, oh, that's not actually possible. People can't afford to buy homes anymore. That sounds familiar. And we're seeing a lot of like haunted house movies like Poltergeist, Amityville, that are all about like these families coming in and discovering that the home that they buy is actually not the dream that they wanted in the first place. So I think that's one direct thing that we're seeing a lot in Poltergeist, is that direct commentary on like what it's like to be a declining middle class family pining after an impossible dream.
And I think it's really interesting that 3 or 4 years since I last seen Poltergeist, the dad of the family, I forget his name. I see his face so
Steve.
clear. Steve, okay. I always
Steve
think because
Freeling.
he the actor who plays him is the same actor who voices Mr. Incredible.
Yes, Craig T. Nelson.
Craig T. Nelson, thank you. Craig T. Nelson. I was getting so mad at myself because I love him. I'm like, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name in this moment. If I remember correctly, his job is selling homes.
Yes, he is, and it's not. It's
Oh.
funny. He's not a real
It's like
estate
the
agent.
stepfather.
Yes, but he's a developer. It's
Yeah.
fascinating because it's like, we are, and I mean the famous thing about Poltergeist too is that they are built on an Indian burial ground. Like we are straight up just like paving over our past and trying to build a quote better life for people. And he's just like trying to sell this American dream of these cookie cutter houses, the suburbia, the like all these houses look exactly the same.
Yep.
It's scary.
And I will always love the ending because I think it's just one of the great moments in horror when he's yelling at his boss or whoever it is. He's like, "You only moved the headstones, but you didn't move the body."
You only move the headstones. Oh, great cinema. Great cinema. Actually, one thing I did want to talk about in Poltergeist is that Stephen Freeling is reading a Reagan book in the movie while he's smoking pot.
Really? That's great.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's so great.
That's the character, the dad, Stephen Freeling, right?
The character, yes, Stephen
Yeah,
Freeling.
cool, cool.
I love how it just kind of showcases that like a lot of people they're not I am liberal, I am conservative. They kind of take elements of any kind of ideologies and just do their own thing a little bit,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, they're kind of, I feel like the family themselves aren't thinking too heavily about politics. Like they're kind of the mindset like, oh, it won't really
Yeah.
affect me all that much, and then it affects them.
They are the moderate.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the actual plot of the movie is that the daughter gets lost and they're trying to reconnect with their daughter. This idea that the perfect American family and the pursuit of the American dream winds up nearly costing them their family.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. The Freelings are one of those families too, where it's like, yeah, they seem much like Nightmare on Elm Street, where they seem like a perfect family, but at the same time, there's like small little things that you're like, oh, things are
Mm.
off here. Like they're smoking pot. People would often say that that's like, well, that's not the nuclear religious Christian family that we usually see. Diane, the mom, had her first child really young, which is something that it's like, oh, that's interesting, not something that we would usually see with Christian fundamentalism at the same time. And, she's also like really well educated. She's reading books on Carl Jung. Like it is like a modern family that we
Yeah.
see being destroyed, but
Yeah.
seemingly a great Christian family. Possibly. The daughter's never home, the older daughter.
But then
Mhm.
they consult with Tangina.
Ugh.
They consult with what would Christians call that? A heretic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The witch doctor.
Yeah. Diane is our mother of horror. That bitch, like, she finds out the house is haunted and she's like, I'm gonna have fun with this. I love her.
She is the best. She is the best. It's the best moment in the whole movie, which has like 27 best moments because Poltergeist is a 10 out of 10. I love Poltergeist. But the best moment of the best moments is when Tangina, she's like, the mother's about to go into the portal and she's like, hey, you can't go in there. You've never been in there. And the mother's like, neither have you. She just looks at her and goes, you're right. You go.
I love it. Oh, Diane is so fucking badass. She goes after her baby. I love
She
it.
does. She does. And it's like,
Amazing.
to your point of like, she's smoking a little bit of pot. She's reading the book. She goes into the unknown, the literal unknown for
Yeah.
her baby. She is Mama Bear. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, they are the best family in the ways that count.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Which is,
'Cause-
yeah, why you
yeah.
root for them so bad. Yeah.
Exactly, because like they fight, they argue, but they got each other's back and they help each other. Although the older daughter, she comes back to the house like just
With it.
what's going on? And no one's telling her.
No, it's like she has a giant ass hickey on her neck. That's my favorite thing about that movie. When I noticed that, I was like, she, like, you don't know anything about her life, and she just appears later on, and you're like, oh, she's been doing some shit because that hickey is huge.
That film is everything I want a Steven Spielberg, Toby Hooper collaboration to be.
Yes.
It's like my favorite elements of Jaws, E.T., and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, yeah, right? Like it is, yeah, perfectly the three of them.
There are two films I really want to talk about, and people listening, it's They Live in Society. We can't do a Reagan and horror episode without They Live and Society.
Those were my
but-
next ones on the list, so I'm happy.
I was about to say we need
I'm
to
making
touch the
sure.
Reaganomics. We need to do the money stuff.
Exactly. So I'm making sure we're talking about them. But before we go into those, do you guys have any films where very quickly you just want to mention them and how our boy Reagan influenced them?
Those were the last two on my list. And then I also wanted to bring up Pumpkinhead, which I think also directly will tie into Reaganomics as well.
Perfect.
There's also, if we're doing military stuff, then there's Aliens. Aliens also has a bit of AIDS stuff in there as well.
Yeah.
There's Night of the Comet has some consumerism
I have that on
stuff
my
in
list.
it. Yeah, that one might come up. Silver Bullet has more religion stuff.
We could go forever is what we're
From
saying.
Beyond has
Yes.
AIDS stuff. Yeah, we could just keep going. This goes on forever. Child's Play, we mentioned it earlier. Child's Play is more of the consumerism.
Oh yeah, very
Night
much
of the
so.
Demons has a Satanic Panic. But yeah, let's just we've like already touched a bit on all of these, so I think let's just focus in on these Reaganomics, They Live, Society, anything else that goes into the Reaganomics, and I think like your listeners can go watch a random 80s horror movie and hopefully they will now be able to see how Reagan influenced it
Directly. Yeah.
There is one more I just kind of want to highlight real quickly,
Yes,
just to make
please.
sure, because I don't know how it ties in with all the other ones. I haven't been able to fit it in yet, but it does tie in. Mentioning aliens, you mentioned military, so this one kind of could fall into that, but I've
Day of
always
the
been
Dead?
very, it's Predator.
Oh, of course you would bring up a Predator. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes
But
sense.
the ultimate 80s action heroes, pure machismo, testosterone fueled action movie, really, until like 45 minutes, an hour in. All of a sudden, it's a sci-fi slasher movie where the most ultimate manly men of Earth are being hunted down by something that's even more armed and muscle bounded. You know?
Yeah, I feel like Predator is heavily Vietnam inspired, right? Like
Mhm.
they're hunting him in the jungle. They're like, we have our guns, so we should be superior, but we're not because he's able to blend in with the environment.
Is
And
Predator male? Sorry, I realizing I might be getting
oh,
it
I'm
mixed up
not
with
sure.
Alien, but is it male or is it female?
I'm not sure.
I think we never see the Predator's junk. And you'd never want to assume, but I do think it's male coded.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off, David. I was
I
just
don't know
curious.
if the xenomorph in Alien is male or female either, because the alien queen in Aliens is obviously female. The
Yeah.
very fact that there is an alien queen makes it unlikely that the others are female, I think. I don't remember how those work in bug colonies. I think there are
Yeah, it's very
females
bug
that aren't.
inspired.
Yeah, because I think a lot of those bug colonies have complicated genders, or just most of them are sterile or something like that, but none
Yeah.
of the aliens are sterile. I don't know.
I've derailed us so much. I was just
You're
curious.
good. No, you're good. You're good.
That's
But
okay.
I do think the Predator is male coded because he's just like
He
what
has dicks on his
Arnold.
face.
Oh, wow. Well, you love
Unlike
being the only woman in a room.
unlike the xenomorph, who's literally a dickhead.
Yeah.
Hey,
Sorry, Dev.
good joke. Go on.
But with the Predator, I think it's in this film you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and you have Carl Weathers, rest in peace. You have Jesse Ventura. Like you have these very masculine men, and Predator. I said this earlier, but he's more muscle bound. He's more heavily armed, and like the ones who survive is Arnold, who makes him lower than he's bathing himself in mud and using sticks and traps to take down the Predator, and then the woman. Those are the ones who survive the movie. So I think Predator deals a lot with like deconstructing the 80s action like stereotypes, also while also incorporating Friday the 13th and Halloween slasher tropes. And it's a fascinating film. But we need
Yeah.
to talk about society real quick.
Cool.
Yes, we do.
And then we'll end with They Live.
Are we spoiling society or not spoiling society?
I'm going to give everyone a warning.
Okay.
This is everyone's warning. If you haven't seen Society, fix your life. Do that now. You will be changed.
I will also say, please go into it blind if you don't know anything about it, because it really, really is worth it.
Yeah.
You will be
Yeah.
changed.
Yes, you will.
And then just skip ahead like 5-10 minutes until we're talking about They Live.
Yep. So, who wants to take the floor?
Society, eat the rich. I'm trying to recall. It's been a while since I haven't seen it actually since we covered it on Cadaver Dogs, and that was 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Time flies when you're podcasting.
Well, the idea of Society is that Billy Warlock is this kid in a very rich family, and he starts to notice that something is off. It's been a minute for me as well, but to just jump ahead to the spoilers, it turns out that all these rich people, including his family, are shape-shifting aliens who have massive orgies, and they are literally a different species. And he was adopted, and they like he will never be one of them. They aren't actually on his side. They actually don't actually care about him. He is more like their pet. And were they like grooming him for a sacrifice or something?
Yeah, I think that was the big part of it too, right? It's like
Yeah.
that they feed on human beings, specifically in this world of the film, the non-wealthy human beings. They literally do feed on the poorer societies. So
Now, who wants to explain Reaganomics?
I went to
can't
school
explain
for
Reaganomics.
film studies.
Yes, yeah. It seems like David will be explaining Reaganomics.
Okay, so basically, leading into Reagan's administration, we were having the worst recession since the Great Depression. It was defined by, what was it called? Stagflation, which is basically there's inflation at the same time as unemployment is like not getting better. So
Actually hit like unemployment hit the lowest it had been since like the 20s or something, right?
yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Well, since the 30s. And in Reagan's administration, this seems to be fixed on paper because he made the rich so much richer that it brought the whole average up. And it just like, oh, look at that. We fixed it, everyone. Except they didn't fix it. His plans were horrible for poor people. Things got a little bit better in the short term, but not really. He basically cut all their taxes. The wealthiest people in America used to be taxed like 70%, and he brought that down to like 28%.
An insane amount. Like that
Yeah.
is insane.
And he gaslit everyone into thinking that it would be completely absurd to tax wealthy people up to 70%, even though like no, they can afford it. That's the entire fucking point.
But it very clearly showed the disparity between the classes at the time. And I mean, something else that we're seeing, this isn't an 80s film, but American Psycho, I think, does depict this very well in the 80s
Yes.
of like this
Yeah.
this desire to be a part of this upper class, which I think like also comments on capitalism and all that fun stuff
It
that we
wasn't
mentioned.
an 80s film, but it was set in the 80s. So I think
Yeah.
it's completely irrelevant to this conversation. Reagan, the way Reagan sold this was he called it trickle down economics, which means that if you give money to the rich people, then they're going to have so much money. So they're just going to like give everybody raises and they're just going to give you the money and it's going to happen on its own because they're really cool and they're nice people and we should help them.
But
And
so,
none of
and
that
the way
happened.
that this, yeah, and the way that society demonstrates this is like, yes, the rich are a completely different class. And yes, they are taking advantage of the situation, specifically of the poorer people, and building a life that is better for themselves where they can take over the world. And they just like do not care about anyone else in society. It's the aliens do not care at all about the humans and are looking to take over the world and
I
have
just
orgies.
want to confess that like for a very long part of that sentence, I forgot that you were talking about the movie society and thought you were just talking about like our society, and it just
Same thing.
I didn't blink because all of that is true until you said aliens, and I was like, oh right, the movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think the scariest part of what you just said, David, is like I wasn't talking about 80s society. That's just society now in general.
Yeah.
It isn't the same.
This is why, like, when people are like, "Oh, let's raise the minimum wage," and then everyone goes like, "What? You can't do that. Rich people, they won't. All the rich people. Think about the rich people."
And it don't make sense to me because if poor people had more money to spend, when they would spend it on products, which makes the rich people rich, anyways. So if you help poor people, you're going to make the rich richer. If you help the rich people, they're just going to get richer and you're not helping anyone. But you know,
so you're saying trickle up economics does make sense, but trickle down does not. And I
Well,
agree.
all I'm saying,
and
all
I
I'm
agree.
saying is we might as well tried it because we tried the other way and none of that wealth trickled down to me.
Well, we tried to trickle up as well before that. That was called FDR's New Deal, and it worked great. And then Reagan slashed it.
Which is so funny because Reagan was like obsessed with FDR and just like really wanted to be FDR.
He's the opposite of FDR.
I know. You know, at one point, Reagan was fucking liberal. He has gay friends. He was working like there's so much stuff about like Reagan's initial life where like he was liberal living a life and then he became a puppet because he went brain dead.
He was an
was he-
actor.
He
But
was
he
the
did use
president
SAG.
of SAG.
Yes, and he did do terrible things with that would only benefit his career and nobody else's. So
Yeah, he
True.
did some shady
Part
shit.
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
And then when he was president, he became a union buster where there was, I forget who it was now, but someone was on strike, but they worked for the government. And this was like early in Reagan's administration. He just like immediately put an end to it. He was like, okay, I'll give you guys 2 days to end this, or else you will all lose your jobs and you'll never be welcome back.
Yeah, he fucking
And then he did
flipped.
that. And then he
was the
did that.
president of a union and then became a union buster. Like, are you what? What?
Mhm. And he made it clear to all of the corporations out there that union busting was okay by Mr. Reagan. And that was true. Strikes went down 70% or something during his administration. It was a crazy number. There used to be like, oh man, I looked up these numbers. It was like 200 a year before him, and then by the end of his administration, it was like 40 a year.
Were there strikes in They Live? I'm trying to recall.
Were there strikes in They Live? Were they striking? Because
I
there
just
is a
saw
part.
saw it recently too.
I watched it 2 days ago.
Oh shit. So you watched it a bit more recently than me. I don't think there's like an explicit "we are striking," but there's
Yeah.
definitely a union of people who get the like military police show up and disperse
I mean,
them.
it's
Yeah.
not even that. It's like a freaking like I don't know what the word for it would be, but you know, it's a collection of homeless people essentially. It's not a shelter
Yeah.
because it's outdoors, but it's like a park where all of the homeless people go and live, and then they get busted by a bunch of police just rolling through and shaking them out and getting rid of them. There are references to unions when Roddy
Yeah.
Piper joins the construction team early in the movie. They say this is a union thing, and he goes, cool. Later on in the movie, when you have all the people who can see, who know what's going on, you have a collection of them that isn't technically a union, but it kind of feels like one. Like it is a bunch of the humans who are rallying against the They Live aliens, who are trying to plan how to overcome them and discussing what to do. Like they even discuss like, oh, we should still go to work. We should still like continue normally for now while we figure out how to handle this. And then the police run through that as well and kill all of them pretty much.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to read that scene as though it's a union, then that is also a union bust. And one of the people there is also actually working for the aliens. As
Yeah.
a little
Well,
spy.
I mean, that's the commentary on it, period, right? It's like it doesn't necessarily have to be the union, but like anyone willing to like gather and revolt or change anything, they're gonna bust them down. And I think that's very reflective of the time of like, hey, let's give women rights, let's allow abortions to happen, let's give gay people rights.
Yep.
Like any people coming up against the quote unquote society of rich aliens or just the people who are taking over the world, yeah, it ain't gonna happen. They're gonna strike you down.
Someone should briefly explain They Live, right? I
No.
don't think we.
No,
No,
we don't need
no,
to.
no.
They-
Okay.
if you haven't seen They Live, that's on you. No. I do want to say, I love They Live. I saw it when they released it in theaters about a year ago, maybe, or
Yeah,
a couple
same.
months.
That movie came out in the 80s.
I thought I said re-release. I must have misspoke. But They Live, basically Roddy Piper's just trying to live life, he's kind of like a drifter. He finds a job with construction and stumbles upon like that homeless community, I guess, is like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
stumbles upon these sunglasses which allow him to see through advertisements. So in like billboard for go on vacation, it's like sleep. A billboard for, I don't know, Victoria's Secret, it's like reproduce. And it's just like subliminal messages in advertising, basically. And then it's like consume, obey, money is the ultimate god, and stuff like that.
It also turns everything into black and white, which is interesting because it
Yeah.
tells you like, no, this is black and white. This is not like, oh, that's just your opinion. It's like, no, it's not. This is black and fucking white.
Yep.
These are fucking alien rich people. The elite are aliens and they are here to enslave us.
Also, it does show you who the aliens are. Like you see who because they, just like society, which I didn't realize They Live in Society, are a great double feature.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, shapeshifting aliens.
Yeah.
Who are
Yeah.
the super rich. And they don't want to share. So I don't want to spoil the whole movie, but that's the premise. And then at some point, Roddy Piper and Keith David has one of the best, if not the best, fight scene in all of cinematic history.
Oh.
It's pretty great.
It made me fall in love with Keith David. I mean, many things made me fall in love with Keith David, but that specifically, I was like, yes.
like I said earlier, if you haven't seen They Live, that's a you problem. But
But we
I
still
just
love
love
you.
how we still love you, but there's like the 7 or 8 minute fight scene, right? And it's all because Roddy Piper wants Keith David to put on the glasses, and Keith David's like, nah, man, I don't want to. And there's this brutal 7, 8 minute fight scene, which is like has like body slamming and like he's bashing Keith David's head in like the cement, and they're like, oh my God, they're biting each other, and it's just super violent. And then it just ends with Roddy Piper putting the glasses on Keith David, and he's like, oh, and then now he sees. It was like all of that could have been very much avoided.
It says so much, though. I mean, obviously, it touches on the economy, capitalism, consumerism, but also touching on to bring it all the way back again to that, living life under rose-colored glasses. There is so
Mhm.
much happening that is like right underneath your nose that you don't realize, and living on that, feeding off of that fear of society of like, oh, the American dream is actually not what it seems. It is a nightmare on Elm Street. Elm Street. What was the
Ooh.
quote that you said? Elm Street is not it happens everywhere, not just Elm Street.
Oh, I think I was like
Every town has an
an
Elm
Elms.
Street.
It does.
Now I'm playing with power. Actually, I don't think that quote works as well. Welcome to prime time, bitch. Okay. That one's a little bit better. And how television is ruining our children. That's a different
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
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 I do want to say I love John Carpenter, and I love how his films, like They Live, is the ultimate example. But we were talking about Christine earlier. We mentioned
Mhm.
Halloween. It's kind of a sin we didn't talk about The Thing.
It's got the AIDS in there. They're
Yep.
sharing needles. They're cutting
Mhm.
each other's hands. They're testing
Literal
their
blood test.
Yep, literal blood
Mhm.
test.
Another shapeshifting
Secrets.
alien.
Yep, more shapeshifting aliens. The calls
Keith
coming
David.
from inside the house. Keith David. But yeah, John Carpenter, obviously big liberal. At one point in They Live, there's a part where it's on the TV. They're talking about John Carpenter. They're like, oh yeah, all those movies by John Carpenter and Tobey Hooper, they're all trash and they have nothing to say, and it's great.
Yeah.
It just has the critics just deriding him in his own movie. Amazing.
Which I think is
Brilliant.
fun. It's good to have like humor with that. But yeah, John Carpenter, I'd say he's progressive,
Extremely.
Yeah.
and he's very like pro working class people. Roddy Piper's like a working class, he works with his hand, like
Yep.
a real American hero. The Thing, Kurt Russell is a pilot, and like they're all like military guys, but Kurt Russell being the pilot is like he's the closest to like a working man in that element, in that setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Halloween,
yeah.
Laurie Strode has the most important job in watching the children.
And Michael Myers wears a working man's jumpsuit.
That's right, he does.
He does.
I mean,
Well,
Halloween is also a deconstruction of the American dream, and
Yes.
suburbia is not actually
Yeah.
as safe as you believe it to be. And going into the 80s, I think all the sequels keep up with that. So John Carpenter definitely put this stuff in all his movies. He was very astute, very aware of everything. And They Live is probably the one where he made his politics most obvious and most apparent.
Yes.
And then he has all the aliens are having a big meeting where they discuss like, oh yes, and we are still on track to completely take over the world by 2025.
That's terrifying. That's the most terrifying thing I've heard on this episode so far.
Well, here's the thing.
No, They Live.
None of us are human. We're all just things. The Thing already won.
Ah, I see.
Ah.
So I was right. Here's the thing.
Hey.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Do we think that John Carpenter intentionally chose 2025 because he knew there would be an election year?
Oh,
I-
I don't. Well, what year was that movie made?
88, 89?
87?
It's late 80s.
Something like that.
88
Yeah,
sounds
late
right,
It's
80s.
late
yeah.
80s. Yeah. If he did, how dare he?
He's a
And
time
he should be
traveler.
pointing to it right now the same way Stephen King keeps pointing to the dead zone and being like, guys, I called it. It's right there. It's in the dead zone. I was looking at all the Reagan shit and I said, this is where it's all going.
The
I
Dead
think
Zone,
John
another 80s
Carpenter.
movie.
I think John Carpenter is just playing video games and watching Lakers basketball. I love this episode already. I already know this episode is gonna be a banger. And I'm so excited. I got one more question for the both of you. Two more questions for the both of
Okay.
you. The first question for both of you is, of the films we talked about, which is your personal favorite?
Oh, well, you already know mine because Poltergeist is like,
Yeah.
it's just my favorite movie of all time. It's just the one that I always go back to. So I'm always happy when we can talk about it. And I always stop myself from talking about it too much. So I know I only like said one little thing, but one day we will have a full episode on Poltergeist and we will go fucking deep.
Dope.
Yes.
We've talked about so many movies, so that's like a really hard question.
It is really hard. I do.
Maybe The Fly, maybe
Ooh.
Halloween. We mentioned Alien for like a second. Return of the Living Dead's pretty great.
Yeah.
You touched on all David's favorites, essentially.
all the nightmare movies. Well, no, because we didn't get in Reanimator, we didn't get in American Werewolf in London. So this is
That's true.
yeah, American Werewolf in
true.
London is my favorite, but he's in London, so
Yeah, he is an American, but we're
He
dealing
is an
with some
American.
London issues.
Yes, there's probably like still some overlap in there, but there's a
Oh,
lot
for
of
sure.
stuff going on in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, what was yours, Austin? Was it Gremlins? We did touch on Gremlins.
We did touch on Gremlins.
We also touched on Predator.
Yeah.
So when I think of
Choose
like,
between your
my-
babies.
when I think of like my top 10 horror films, A Nightmare on Elm Street is usually on that list. Sometimes it's 11 or 12. The Thing is on that list generally. Predator is always on that list. Gremlins is up there, but the one that's in my top 5 that we did talk about is Christine.
Oh,
Yes.
really?
Interesting.
So my top 5 horror films, disqualifying Jurassic Park because that's my all-time favorite movie and I like to make things interesting.
Fair.
I would say would be Alien, Jaws, Scream, Candyman, and Christine.
That's an eclectic. I like it.
Did you listen to our episode on Christine and we need to talk about Kevin?
Yes. Yes, I did. Yes. Although I have to admit, I skipped the we talk about Kevin part because I haven't
But
seen
we
that
need
movie.
to talk about Kevin.
I haven't seen it. I got to. So I just listened to the Christine. But I have to. But you know, the nice thing is that episode's gonna get another, at least guaranteed one more listen.
Cool.
So that's the nice thing. Did you end up picking one, David? Or is it too hard?
The Fly.
Okay. So, Devin, I'm going to ask you first.
So good.
Should you find yourself moving into the perfect suburban house only to find out they didn't move the headstones in your house?
The headstones.
Your house, you're in Poltergeist. Would you die?
I always will die in a horror movie. Would I die in Poltergeist specifically? Oh, it's hard. No one dies in Poltergeist.
Yeah,
That's the thing. Like, you got a good.
No, it's Poltergeist.
What?
He said that's the thing, so I didn't.
Oh.
Oh,
I mean,
wow,
I
missed that.
literally
was
just
like,
made the exact same joke again.
Wow. That went over my head.
I didn't catch it that time. I didn't catch it that time. Oh my god.
So
Am I
yes,
human?
I would survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because no one dies. Would I go into the alternate world? Probably. Yeah. Sure.
Even if it's not your kid, you just be like, "Yeah, I'm going in there," and then Tenchi would be like, "Wait, you've never been in there," and you'd be like, "Yeah, exactly. I want to see what it's like."
Well, hold on.
Neither
We
of
all know
you.
that I am Tangina in this movie sphere.
That's a good point. Yeah,
I love it.
but you would
I
go
love it.
in.
But I would go in.
Yeah, Diane would say, "Neither of you," and be like, "You're right. Fine, let's both go in."
Exactly. We got this. So now, David, I am not going to
Can I
ask.
switch because I don't want to be
Oh.
the fly? Only because I don't
Well, I
want
was
to be the fly.
I was
That's
gonna
what
say
yours
I am not gonna splice your genes with that of a
Oh,
fly.
okay,
You would
okay,
not
okay.
because the answer is yes. There's no survive. Like that's not a fair. But if you were Gina Davis,
All right,
or
so I
just
had
like,
sex with Jeff Goldblum. Cool.
or you're just in the world of the Brundlefly.
I'm definitely gonna abort.
Oh.
Oh yeah, that movie also is pro-abortion, by the way. It's pro-choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pro-choice. Pro-choice.
Yeah, take that, Reagan. But if you were in the world of the Brundlefly, normally I'd ask would he die, but would he win an wrestling match with Jeff
No.
Goldblum? I wouldn't either.
But I wouldn't lose to him either, because I am not challenging Jeff Goldblum to an arm wrestling match. I'm just like, nah, man, I can't. I'm not good at that.
Jeff
Not
Goldblum
even-
would charm me out of everything. Like I would lose strictly just because he's so charming. If he'd be like, I'm winning. I'm like, okay, yeah.
And not even the Brundlefly. I'm just talking Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I
actual
know.
Jeff Goldblum.
I know.
So, okay. I guess I have to answer my own question. My favorite is Christine.
Would you survive, Christine?
If I'm like part of Buddy Repperton's crew, no, I wouldn't. First off, I deserve to die because we hate bullies in this house. But yeah, Christine would kill me and probably run me over while on fire. So it'd be pretty cool. But if I was in Arnie's shoes,
Oh.
because I am, believe it or not, guys, I'm a little bit of a nerd.
But I don't think you're like as closetedly toxic and cruel as Arnie is, depending on your interpretation of whether he was
That's-
always like that or if he's possessed.
That's the thing, because like
No, that's Christine.
it's John Carpenter. We're in the same wheelhouse. But no, I'm glad you bring that up because depending on your interpretation, is Christine bringing something out of Arnie that he always had? Or is Christine transforming Arnie? Was Arnie a good person and then corrupted by weaponized nostalgia? So depending on your interpretation, regardless, I could be anyone could be corrupted. Because Arnie is a good guy, like a genuine sweetheart at the beginning of the movie. There's a reason why Dennis is his friend, and Dennis is
Yeah.
always looking out for him. So if I were to be corrupted by Christine, I would also die. Just because. Yeah. So a long answer short, yes, Christine would kill me in one way or the other.
But what if you are Christine?
Oh.
Christine, don't die. I saw that little flicker. She comes. That's the thing about like a lot of these 80s horror villains. Just like Reagan, they keep coming back.
They keep coming back. Sorry. That was my attempt at Reagan. I apologize. I apologize.
I love it. I love it.
Or Arnie, it'll be back.
So that is, guys, that is our episode
Oh man.
on
Thank you for letting me
80s
for
horror,
letting us, sorry, not just me, David as well, for letting us talk about Reagan and not just like mention him in one sentence on our show, but like actually get to do a deep dive. Really appreciated it.
We talked about so many movies.
So many movies.
Yeah, that was a lot of movies.
And this is a big episode. Happy 4th of July, guys. This is our Americana episode for the year. We love America.
I hope
Woo,
you can still have a
America.
happy 4th of July after everything we just told you.
I'm
Yes.
going to. I'm going to watch Jaws.
Watch Jaws. Watch The Purge.
Yeah.
Watch I know what you did last summer.
Yeah, that was the other one. Yeah. that's
Watch
right.
They Live. Watch Society. Watch The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys is like a great summer movie. I think.
That's true.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a
Yep.
good one.
Completely.
A Nightmare on Elm Street. Save the thing for wintertime. Or
Watch
don't.
The
You do you.
Stepfather.
Yeah.
Actually, The Stepfather
Yes.
is a Thanksgiving movie.
Yes.
Night
We got
of the
some Christmas
Comet.
ones in there, too.
Oh yeah,
Night of the
Night
Comet
of the
has
Comet. Night of the
fireworks.
Comet's amazing.
It has fireworks.
Yeah. And it's all about just like exploring an abandoned mall after everyone's dead.
Oh, that's so
So
80s.
there's so much. There's
It's
so
great.
much. Watch Cujo. I couldn't
Hmm.
fit it into the Reagan aspects, but Dee Wallace trapped in a Pinto with her son by a rabid dog.
Watch
There's
Reanimator, not because there's anything to do with the 4th of July, but because why wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, like, the rabid Saint Bernard represents trickle down economics.
I think so. Right?
Just don't ask me to explain.
I haven't seen Cujo.
Just trust me. It doesn't have a Rottweiler.
No, unfortunately. But when you do watch Cujo, keep in mind what the dogs are truly representing.
I will be on the dog side, to be clear.
I'm pretty sure that's how Stephen King intended it.
It's a dog.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
That's why I haven't seen it. I'm like, I don't. It's a dog.
That's fair.
It's innocent.
No, that's fair. It is fair. That is very
Yeah.
fair. And that's what there's a lot of reasons why Cujo is a very scary movie. And that's one of them. So thank you guys so much. I loved this. What is happening with you guys? Where can the people find you? Do your plugs, do your thing.
I actually, it should be up by now. Right now, I'm working on a Kickstarter that should be released by this time. I just directed a short film starring Larry Fessenden called Wild Animals, which is about a father and son whose hunting trip turns into a nightmare when the boy reluctantly kills a strange animal and activates a curse. We've already shot it. It looks amazing. And now we're in post-production and we're raising some extra funds for that. So I'll give you a link to put in the show notes, but I mean it'll be like kickstarter.com/wild-animals, where you can join us on this journey, and it'll be out well, it'll be going around the festivals probably later this year. So if you join the campaign, then you'll get to see it then instead of whenever it goes online in like 2 years.
And then if you want to see some of our previous work that David and I have done together, we have a short film on Bloody Bites, which is a bloody, disgusting short film distribution channel. That's available pretty much anywhere, but for you horror fans out there, it is on Screambox. Our short is called Blind Spot, not Blonde Spit, and it is season 2, episode 4. It's actually a callback to 80s slashers and B movies of that decade. So I am acting in it, but I also produced it, and David wrote it and directed it.
It's very silly and slapsticky and like just this flat out parody, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Yes.
We were like sitting around at a bar discussing this idea, and we were all just like, we gotta shoot this now before like we get too good to shoot this, because we need to shoot this now.
It was very fun. And then also I have other work on Shudder. My feature film is called A Nightmare Wakes, and that is about Mary Shelley as she's writing Frankenstein. So always love to shout that one out as our feminist Frankenstein film.
It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
David worked on it also.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that one. That one's fantastic. And my previous short that I directed is also currently up on YouTube. It is called Pillow Talk. You would have to search like Pillow Talk horror or something like that. Or we can just put another link. We'll give you a lot of links.
I got you. All the links are in the show notes. And the links to the Cadaver Dogs podcast, which
yeah, the other thing we can plug.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you liked anything that you heard today, I feel like you will like our show. We didn't actually talk about what we do on our show, but we take themes in horror movies and talk about the social and political and cultural influences that inspired them. So everything you heard today is essentially what we do on our show. If you like anything, I think we shouted out several episodes throughout the show. So you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We are Cadaver Dogs. And then we are on Instagram at Cadaver Dogs Pod.
Yes. So everyone go listen. These guys watch their work, listen to their show. I'm so happy that we did this episode. Like,
Oh, thank you so
I
much.
think it's a banger.
I had so much fun. Thank you for having us on.
Same. Oh man, this is great.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Thank you, Devin and David, for joining me and for going on this quest to explore the horrors of Reagan's America with me. I love films of the 1980s, and it was so much fun to talk about these iconic films within the context of the culture and political climate of when they were released. If you like this show or my other horror endeavors, then I recommend subscribing to my Patreon. I retooled it so it's only $3 a month, and you'll get exclusive content, movie reviews, as well as the extended version of this episode. The extended version of this episode contains conversations on Return of the Living Dead, The Blob, Gremlins, Silent Night, Deadly Night, and a tangent about why yours truly can beat up Mikey My My. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Would You Die YouTube channel. You can watch video versions of the podcast episodes, my short film Ice Cream, and more stuff to come on that channel. If you like this show, please let me know. Leave a review and rate on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to this show. Also, feel free to interact with me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you're most comfortable. It may not seem like a lot, but trust me, every single like, share, comment, follow, it really helps this podcast grow and helps keep me going. And feel free to let me know how I'm doing. What do you guys like about the show? What are some areas I can improve? Guests you'd like me to have on? Monsters you want me to talk about? Let me know what you guys think. Do you like monsters, gore, and behind-the-scenes looks at your favorite horror films? Then be sure to check out FANGORIA, one of the premier brands in horror. FANGORIA has been delivering quality magazines since 1979. Each collectible issue features exclusive articles about your favorite monsters, as well as up-and-coming terrors. Be sure to check out the FANGORIA store website for subscriptions and a bunch of cool merch. And while you're there, use promo code WoodYouDieShow for 20% off your entire order. That's right, 20% off your entire order. Applies to subscription and one-time orders, applies to the first subscription order only. You can find the show's social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Would You Die Show. Also now you can follow me on TikTok at Would You Die Podcast. Would You Die is a partner with the Three Wise Men Media, a Metro Detroit-based group of awesome guys, Kyle, Tyler, and Dylan, where they bring you professional wrestling, indie comic books, and so much more. The music you hear in the beginning and end of each episode is composed by my friend Josie Palmer. Next week, I haven't quite made up my mind on what's happening next week. It's either going to be an episode on a very relevant film or a deep dive into horror of a different medium. Until next time, I'm Austin Torres. Try not to die.